Hello, in this video I'm going to compare some basic principles in vibrational astrology with the basic principles in Western and Vedic astrology. If you're watching this video as part of the Introduction to Vibrational Astrology, this is lesson 8, but you can also watch this video independently. Now, if you are going through the Introduction to Vibrational Astrology course, I'm going over this now because we have now gotten a good idea about the meanings of the planets. And the next thing we're going to do, the next major thing we're going to do, is look at planetary pairs. So what does it mean when Venus is aspected to Jupiter? What does it mean when Venus is aspected to Saturn, etc., etc.? All those planetary pairs, we're going to go over them. But before we do, I want to just clear up a few things in this video and also the next video, and then we're ready to jump in and start learning what each planetary pair means. So let's review a few concepts, because as we're going through the meanings of the planetary pairs, sometimes people get a little sidetracked because they're thinking along the lines of modern Western astrology or Hellenistic astrology or Vedic astrology. So let's again review and clarify just a few basic principles of vibrational astrology and how they compare to other forms of astrology. Number one, in modern, let's look at it like this. Instead of modern Western, let's go back to Hellenistic and medieval Western astrology. In those systems, there are 5 aspects: conjunctions, oppositions, squares, trines, and sextiles. In more modern times, people have added a few more aspects like the semi-sextile, the quincunx, the semi-square, the sesquiquadrat, and typically that's about it. Some people experiment with a few others. So that's the big difference between modern Western astrology and ancient Western astrology and vibrational astrology in regards to aspects. Is in vibrational astrology, we look at an aspect as a fraction of a circle, and we go up into the 400ths, at least 400ths of a circle. So almost any fraction, actually not almost, any fraction of a circle is an aspect, and that seems overwhelming and confusing, but as we will see, we have a very clear and direct way to find out which of those aspects are the most important and relevant to a person. Now, also related to aspects is the question of orbs. So in vibrational astrology, we have a simple formula for determining the orb. Because an aspect is a fraction of a circle, we take the denominator, the bottom part of the fraction, and divide it into 16, and that is the orb. So for example, the orb for a 1/8 aspect, or a 3/8 aspect, also known as a semi-square and a sesquiquadrat, what is the orb? Take the denominator 8, divide it into 16, the orb is 2 degrees. Now for the aspects that are 16ths, which is the 1/16, 3/16, 5/16, and 7/16, 16 divided into 16 is 1, so it's a 1 degree orb. Notice that if the fraction reduces to a smaller fraction, then you have the orb of that smaller fraction. So 2/16 is 1/8. So there really isn't a 2/16 aspect. There's a 1/8 aspect. There's some more I will say about that much later in this course. But for now, that's good enough. So what is the orb for a sextile? Just one more example. Well, a sextile is 1/6. 6 divided into 16 comes out to 2 2/3, or in other words, 2 degrees 40 minutes. Now, how does this compare to Vedic astrology? Well, in Vedic astrology, each planet has its own aspects. It's a very curious system from the Western point of view. So, for example, a Jupiter makes trine aspects, but not all planets make trine aspects. So some planets will make a square like 270 degrees from the point where it's at, and so on. So each planet has its own aspects that it makes. And the aspect is usually done sign to sign. So when Jupiter makes a trine, suppose Jupiter is in Aries, it trines anything in Leo or Sagittarius. So the issue of orbs doesn't really come up. It's usually based on a sign to sign. This is sort of your classic, most common form of Jyotish. There's many, many varieties of Jyotish. But, that's kind of probably the most common kind of way of interpreting charts using Jyotish. Now, there is some similarity here between Jyotish and medieval and Hellenistic astrology, because in many forms of medieval and Hellenistic astrology, I say forms because there's always a lot of variety. So in some variations of medieval and Hellenistic astrology, each planet has its own orb. So Mercury may have an orb, say it's 6 degrees for all 5 aspects, and maybe Venus has an orb of 7 degrees. I don't remember the orbs different medieval astrologers use, but that's a curious idea. But in modern Western, it's gotten simplified to where the orb is simply for an aspect. Doesn't matter what the planet is, doesn't matter, nothing else matters. You just squares get a certain orb. Now, some people do give a larger orb for sun and moon, but other than that, every object gets the same orb. And vibrational astrology follows the modern way, and in fact, we do not give larger orb to sun and moon. The orb is attached to the aspect. So I'm just reviewing these things because as we go into these planetary pairs and you start looking at aspects in your chart and the charts of other people, it can get confusing. It'll get confusing if you're using the ideas from a different system of astrology that has different rules. Okay. Other differences between vibrational astrology and other systems? Well, in vibrational astrology, we use midpoint structures. They are extremely important, and also isotraps, which are 4 planet patterns. We will dig into these in detail in other classes in this course, but that's some of the very critically important things, not just aspects, but midpoint structures and what we call isotraps, which are 4 planet patterns with particular rules to how those 4 planets are connected together. Are midpoints used in other systems of astrology? They're almost never used in Western astrology. They're basically not used in Hellenistic and medieval astrology. There's some very special situations in Vedic astrology where they show up, but for the most part, they're not used. And there is a system of Western astrology called cosmobiology that uses midpoints. In fact, in cosmobiology, midpoints are the most important thing that's interpreted. And cosmobiology was more popular in the 1970s than it is today. So we inherit the idea of midpoints from cosmobiology. We talked about this in the previous classes, but I just want to review some of the key differences. Now, what about rulers, exaltation, fall, and detriment? These are critically important, extremely important in both Vedic and Western astrology, but they are not yet used in vibrational astrology. Why don't we use them? Because we go through a rigorous research methods and we have not yet confirmed them. The fact we don't use them does not mean they don't work. It just means we haven't incorporated them yet into the system. However, suppose you have not studied other systems of astrology, you just want to study VA, you're not really that interested in other systems, I would still highly recommend that you memorize this table. Sun is the ruler of Leo, Sun is exalted in Aries, Moon is the ruler of Cancer, Moon is exalted in Taurus, etc. Memorize this table because people use it all the time. Let's put it this way, you're limiting yourself in your ability to communicate with other people if you don't have this table memorized. And looking at Jupiter and Saturn and Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, we have Mars ruling Aries and Scorpio, but some modern Western astrologers say that Pluto rules Scorpio. I put it in parentheses, meaning only some astrologers, only some modern Western astrologers say that Pluto rules Scorpio. So some modern Western astrologers say that Mars rules Aries and Pluto rules Scorpio, and some would say that both Mars and Pluto rule Scorpio. This is only an issue for some of the modern Western astrologers. In Hellenistic, medieval, and in Vedic astrology, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto do not rule anything. So an object can be important but doesn't necessarily rule a sign. Bottom line is you should memorize this table so that you can communicate with other people when they're interpreting charts, because they're very fundamental. Again, we do not use them, not yet anyway, in vibrational astrology. With more research, maybe we'll be able to start using them. And also I want to mention that in medieval and Hellenistic astrology, there are additional signs that a planet is strong and effective in, or that a planet is weak and ineffective in. And these are, two of them, are the triplicity rulers and the terms. Another word for term is bound. So you may hear it called a bound or a term of a planet. They're basically the same idea as rulers and exaltation. It's just another way in which planets have a strength and an effectiveness, or a lack of strength and a lack of effectiveness in particular signs. I'm not going to go into that right now. I just want to let you know that there's a more complex system of determining how a planet is functioning in a sign in medieval and Hellenistic astrology. In Vedic astrology, they have some additional rules as well, other rules for determining things like this. But in vibrational astrology, we're not using any of this, any of these dignities, as they're called. Now here's, again, we've already learned this, but I'm just reviewing some key important issues just to summarize and make sure you've got this clear, that in VA, each planet, sign, and house performs a specific function. In other forms of astrology, there are various associations and various possibilities, and often a story, myth, or archetypal quality. So Venus is attraction to beauty in VA. In other forms of astrology, in other forms of astrology, Venus can be art, it can be sociability, it can have associations with different things. In VA, we see that each planet performs a function, and the connection of Venus with art is a symptom or manifestation of the basic process. Those are just a few key issues. There are many, many, many other details, obviously, of different astrological systems, including VA. I just wanted to review a few because we are very soon going to be going over the meanings of what does Mercury in aspect to Venus mean? What does Mercury in aspect to Mars mean? And we will be explaining it more in terms of functions, in terms of processes, and what the symptoms of that process are. We will not be talking about the sign it's in terms of ruling or being in fall or detriment or any of those things. And we will be using particular orbs. I'm just summarizing some key issues so that that's clear. Every system of astrology has its own set of rules. What we're going to do next is the next video is going to be on identifying aspects in the chart wheel. I'm going to have one more video, and then there may be another very brief video, but I'm just covering a few more things in a few more videos, and then we'll go through each planetary pair. When we start the videos, there's 4 videos on planetary pairs, and I say something like, this is what Mercury in aspect to Venus means. You can look at your chart wheel and see if you have a very strong Mercury-Venus aspect. And so in the next 2 videos, I will show you how you find that. So the next video just goes over the idea of aspects in general, and then I'll have a short video on identifying aspects that are within 1 degree, so that as we go through the planetary pairs, you can look at your chart or the charts of friends and family or famous people and see if a particular pair shows up strong and see if it makes sense for that person. Now, in future courses, we will learn about each aspect. So what does Mercury aspected to Venus in 5 vibration mean? What does it mean in 7 vibration, in 11 vibration? Every kind of aspect is going to give a different effect. but we have to build our foundation. So first, let's understand each planetary pair, and then we'll begin to understand how that meaning changes a little bit, or not just a little bit, how it changes for different kinds of aspects, but the essential quality of Mercury and Venus never changes. So you need to learn that. Okay, that's it, my friends. Okay, next video, let's learn about seeing aspects in the chart wheel. Some of you already know all this, but just to make sure you're not missing anything as we move forward. Thank you very much for listening, my friends. God bless. Namaste.